Okay, great. So we have civil disobedience. So what social movement do you think of when I say civil disobedience? Civil rights movement, great. You guys aren't being creative. All right, so what's another tactic?
Strike.
Strikes. So who uses strikes? Laborers, right? What's similar to a strike that you could do, but if it's not a bigger employer?
You can still strike. There are different kinds of strikes.
What?
I mean, you can still strike different kinds of strikes. You don't just have to strike against your employer.
Okay, so who else can you strike against?
Well, you can have, like, strike against unwaged productive labor.
Okay.
Which means, like, striking against, like, housework internationally.
Oh, that's good. You could boycott, sort of similar to a strike in terms of a refusal to participate. You just said direct action. So what would be an example of direct action?
I guess sabotaging, like economic sabotage.
Right, we saw a lot of that with Occupy, right? So some other movements that use direct action might be the environmental movement or the animal rights movement. I think we could think of some other movements too, but I'm being centered on my own movements here, I guess. So there's a lot of tactics out there. Today we're going to constrain our talk a little bit. We support all these tactics that were just mentioned, but in our campaign we only use legal tactics right now. So we're not closed off to other tactics. That's just what's sort of in the rubric of what we're talking about today. But help us expand our minds and help us push past that a little bit as we go on. We love that. So we think of tactics as a toolbox, right? There's this toolbox and it's full of all these tactics. And some of these tactics get whipped out and used a lot, like a screwdriver, right? And some don't get used as much, and they take a little bit more skill to utilize, like civil disobedience. If you're going to do successful civil disobedience, you probably want to do a little bit of training and a little bit more planning, right? And some of these tools are more powerful than other tools, and not every tool is right for every job. So something that we see a lot in social movements is the same sort of tactics often get used over and over and over again. But we want to encourage you guys to think about tactics as something that needs to be used strategically. We also really want to hone in on the point that every tool in the toolbox should always be available if you want to be a successful activist. So you might not be comfortable with all of them. You might not become an expert at all of them, but you should be willing to think about them all, to recognize them all, and to be willing to utilize them. And to the degree that you don't utilize them, for example, we don't use illegal direct actions in our campaign, but we would never denigrate anyone who executed something like that and didn't hurt anyone. So we're aware that this tool is there, we're aware that it can be effective, and we're okay with it being used. So when you close off your toolbox to certain tools, you're not going to be as effective. Because if you keep it open to anything and everything that might be effective. Now, I'm not saying don't place limits on it, don't place bounds on it. Every individual makes decisions based on their lifestyle, based on their own moral compass, based on their ethics. Different people have different obligations and can take different risks than others. But we're simply saying that you should be open, you should recognize things, and you should certainly not denigrate others in your own movement. Because when you do that, you embrace the rhetoric of the oppressors. When you spend time smashing others in your own movement, and I'm thinking of the animal rights movement here, we engage in a tactic that we're going to talk to you more about called home demo. And we have been told that we are violent, and we have been told that we are acting in a way that is close to terrorism for simply showing up at an animal abuser's house and telling them that it's not okay and they need to stop. When we have animal rights activists saying that to us, they are embracing the rhetoric of the dominant power structure, and we need to make sure that we don't do that. So that is sort of the dry, boring explanation of the way that we're envisioning the tools that we're going to use. So we're going to go through a couple different things, and I think Vida's probably going to lead the charge here. But just to give you an outline in your head so you know the topics that we're going to cover, if that helps you. One is establishing the goals that you're going to use. Once you know your goals, you need to define your target. Once you know what your goals are and you know what your target is, that is when you choose a tactic. And when we're thinking about tactics, we need to talk about accepting tactics and when you do and don't place limits on what you accept, developing proficiency in tactics. And we're going to talk about two things with that. One, being able and trained enough to use tactics when you need to, but really developing proficiency in one tactic. So knowing a little bit about everything, but finding what your aptitude is and becoming really great at that. Because you don't need to be, if you're a really great leader and you're really great at running chants and protests, maybe that's what you need to focus on. If you're really great at doing outreach and talking to people, maybe that's what you need to focus on. But you need to know how to do both things, right? And you don't want to be trying to do everything because you want to do what's best for your movement. The number one thing activists should always remember is you don't want to stand out from the crowd. Right now as an activist, people look at you and you're like, oh, you're that activist person. But if any social movement's going to win, activists need to look like part of a crowd, right? We need to have so many of us that we're indistinguishable from one another. And that activists, as Vida was saying, is not a part of how others define us because it's not something so unique because there's so many of us out there fighting for justice. And then we also need to know when to use what tactics. So those are the different topics that Vida's going to go over.
So I want to kind of go off of what Carol was just talking about. It's really, really important in this movement, and any social movement really, that we incorporate what the people want. Because just because we're organizing certain demos or events or call-ins or things like that, by no means that this is our vision and it's solely our vision and it's not open to discussion because this is all about us, like we're in this together. So in terms of things like home demos, right, or other sorts of activism that is considered to be violent or volatile or too confrontational or too intimate or, you know, whatever we call it these days, I think it's really, really important that we redefine what these things mean. I was having a conversation last weekend with an activist who I actually really admire. I just recently met him. But what struck a chord with me is that when we were talking about home demos, he was talking about how he was opposed to them because he saw them as bullying. And when I thought about it, I asked him to redefine what bullying really meant to him. Because bullying happens when you are hitting on a person or a group of people because of something that they either cannot help or choose to live by. It could be a lifestyle that they just embrace and feel comfortable and happy doing. That's not affecting anybody in a negative way. It's not harming anybody. Vivisectors are completely different. So once you start using that kind of rhetoric, like what Carol was saying, you've already done what society has tried to do this entire time since we've been born, right? Because we have been programmed to respect rules that are oppressive and that keep certain beings in a place of underneath. And we want to dismantle that as much as possible. So the next time, you know, you're engaging in a protest that's completely legal or not, whatever it is that you do, and you find yourself uncomfortable to kind of like make a wave, realize that that's that programming that has already succeeded, and you don't want that to continue because if you have that hindrance on you, it will completely hinder your ability to be a proper hard-hitting activist. And the most important reason that's important is because you want to actually liberate, and that's the most important, like that's why you're doing this, right? So in terms of different tactics that we've tried things that, you know, sorry, I'm gonna change it up really quick.
You don't have to. I mean, it's in pencil, so we can.
Sorry, I'm really nervous right now. I'm really sorry. Okay. I'm actually going to expand on this really quick before I get into the structure that we were talking about. In terms of tactics, we've tried different things that have been really successful for us as a campaign. We've been around since about June, and we've tried things that have not been successful. We've tried things that we've sat, you know, for hours, literally from like 7 p.m. to like midnight, having meetings and talking about like these awesome visions that we have and executing them. And like, you know, sometimes 30 people will come and sometimes 5. When 5 people show up, what we do is we open the floor to different activists and people who want to get involved, and we take what they have to say. And so we've done different things, like for example, we've done video outreaching where we'll go down to Promenade in Santa Monica, we'll go down Hollywood, we'll go to Westwood, and we'll stand with videos streaming live footage of what happens in animal laboratories. That has been really effective for us. And some of us were surprised because people, you know, sometimes don't give others credit, saying, people want to shut their eyes, they don't want to know. But we got over 400 postcards signed in the National Institutes of Health in about an hour and a half. That's pretty incredible, right? Also, we tried in tying it into like cultural celebrations, like Dia de los Muertos. That wasn't. I mean, it was successful. It was successful, but we definitely could have had more people there. So, which is why we are here to really talk with you and connect with you and see what it is that you all want to do and how you want to like affect the movement. Like, what do you want to bring to the table? What do you think is effective? What do you think is not effective? All right. So. In terms of goals, we really have to evaluate what it is that we want. If our goal, for example, is to disrupt and to agitate, and let's say we pick our tactic as a home demo to do that, we shouldn't be that much worried about what the general public's going to think about it, because people will always have their thoughts, be it fellow activists of ours, friends, family, people who are passerby, people in the media will definitely have their thoughts. We cannot allow that to stop us from doing something that is absolutely necessary. If your goal, for example, is to communicate and to build a bridge with people and tell them what vivisection is and tell them that you really need this just one single signature from them, and that will be like, a part of a collective of hundreds of emails and hundreds of signatures that will go to the psych departments of UCLA or the NIH, then that's really important that you form like, you understand what people want in terms of communication. How do you reach people effectively? How do you gauge different personality types? And when do you know to like leave a person when it's taking way too long to go to the next person, right? So establish your goal, know what that is, and then from there you can build your tactics.
So in terms of goals, there's going to be two levels of goals, right? There's going to be, and if anyone has any other ideas, please throw them in, because there's no, I think there was an activist university actually in San Francisco that can get shut down. So there's no activist university, it's all trial and error. And unfortunately, we don't save our information very well as activist communities to share with each other. So a lot of times we're all starting from scratch. So if anyone has anything to throw in at any time that improves the knowledge that we're sharing right now, please speak up and share it. So in terms of goals, there's two types of goals. There's goals that are specific to the campaign that you're talking about. So can people shout out the different movements that they're involved in?
This last election, I was very much involved in Prop 37, which was getting the samples on the pass and all that. And from what you were saying about kind of trial and error, what's more effective and what's not more effective, and this particular proposition started somewhere really small. It was very grassroots level, actually. All of it was pretty much
you guys didn't hear the example of the movement she's involved in was Prop 37, GMO labeling, and what she learned was a lot of perseverance. And for this one, so to bring it back to goals, the goal was very defined. It was to educate and it was to convince people, a very specific goal, to convince people to vote a certain way. So is anyone in the environmental movement? Women's movement? Animal liberation movement? Okay, so the anarchist movement? Okay.
And also the zeitgeist movement.
Zeitgeist movement? Any others? Okay, so I'll try to have examples that are relevant to people, but so when we think of goals, again, there's two levels. There's a very specific one. So I don't want GMO labeling, so my goal is to get people to vote in a certain way, right? So I want tactics about that goal. We're involved in the anti-vivisection movement. So we have to decide what is our goal. Is our goal to get, is our goal to stop testing on animals for cosmetics, or is it to stop research testing, right? We have to make that decision on a very basic level because the degree, the tactics that we use and what we're going after are going to be very different, right? So getting people to use cruelty-free products is different than getting the National Institutes of Health to stop funding research. So we need to choose that goal. But on a higher level, we all, or not higher is more important, but on a broader level, there's also the goal of what are you trying to do? And I think, and Vida said this, and we've sort of come to the conclusion that you can really simply break this down into you want to educate or you want to agitate. And oftentimes you want to educate and agitate, but when you're choosing things for specific campaigns or a specific action, you often need to decide, do I want to educate or do I want to agitate? And if you find out how to do both, then that's amazing, but it's often really hard to do in one event. So once you know what your goal is, then you need to figure out what the most effective targets are. So you have something to say about that. So about food demos and targets, we need to be really careful that we choose targets strategically and we don't choose targets to be socially appropriate. So in the campaign that we're working on, we're saying, let's take the lowest hanging fruit. 3 people, 3 fucking assholes, mutilate non-human primates. 3 people need to change their minds to stop this at a basic level at one university, right? So that to me seems like a really viable target. We might have other targets in our campaign, but the 3 people who are doing this, and they're not exploited people, they're extremely privileged people. Did you know that there's more vegans than there are PhDs in this country? I mean, these people are like super, super privileged, right? They can have any job they want, so they choose this willingly. So we think that's a really viable target, but something that we come up against a lot is this idea that we're bullying them. Why would you make these people feel uncomfortable? Why would you target these people? Targeting them is harassment. And so when we choose our targets, we need to get the script of society out of our head. I mean, we might need the script of society in our head in order to change hearts and minds of other people. But when you as an organizer, as an activist, choose who the most effective tactic is, just shed away the notions of what is socially appropriate. It is okay not to be socially appropriate. Once a mass of people are guided by moral principles and ethical principles instead of principles of popularity, the world will be a lot better of a place. So when you're choosing your target, keep that in mind. So what is our goal? What is our target? And this is going to be, for entire campaigns or movements, there's going to be a lot in both of those areas. If you're talking about a specific event, you need to really hone it down to just 1 or 2. So then, do you have anything else to say about this?
So also remember that, like, although it's very, very beautiful, it's incredibly moving to see a large body of people who are advocating a particular cause. Remember that we cannot wait for that to happen. So the reason those movements actually build is because people get out of their comfort zones and they get out on the streets and they do what needs to be done regardless whether or not people want to join. People will join, and that's just what's going to happen. But we all, I think, need to be better autonomous organizers on our own and not wait for the next person to put together the next demo or shout the loudest or whatever it is. Like, we all need to really unify and be more homogenous, like what Carol was saying earlier. And remember that great victories really do come. This month has been really awesome because European Union now no longer tests cosmetics on animals, which is incredibly huge. At the same time, China Eastern Airlines no longer flies primates for medical research, which is also amazing. And I believe that there are 1 of 4 airlines left. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. 1 of 4 airlines left. 1 of 3.
Well, there's 3. Oh no, but there's never mind.
Okay, so
there's
about
3 left.
70% of primates were coming from China to be
Through
tested on
LAX.
in the U.S. And now there's not a single airline that went to China.
Like, that's amazing.
So that's huge.
That's amazing. Like, you think about that, right? And think about how many global actions took place, just around the entire world for however many months it continued. And to think, like, I went to a protest of that about a week or 2 weeks before that entire thing was shut down, and I didn't even do the legwork. Like, that was the only one I got to attend because I learned about it a little bit later. But to know that these things are not only possible, they're happening all around us, allow that to be your fuel, But at the same time, even if that stuff is not happening, we still have to have an urgent need to want to be a part of this and to make that happen, to make these victories happen.
And can I bring that back to tactics? So since we're talking about, targets. Since we're talking about targets, think of what Vida was just saying about not waiting for a critical mass of people. And what's your name? I'm sorry. Dee was saying she was like the crazy lady at the farmer's market trying to get signatures, and then once people saw people getting signatures, more and more people came. So, there's a crowd mentality, and we all have it. When we see something being successful, we want to join it. And so think about this target, China Eastern Airlines, an international airline company. Think about the crazy person who picked that target, who was like, yeah, me and my buddies are going to start protesting an airline, like a huge international corporation. And
There was only like 10, 15 people there, like at the protest,
well, at that protest,
At ours, but I'm just saying, at some of them, it wasn't so many.
yeah, so there were only
were.
10 or 15 people, but when
That's what I'm saying,
it started
yeah.
in one country with a few people, and someone made a website and just did research and put locations for targets in every major city in the world, and it became an international campaign. So some crazy person was like, I'm going to target that huge ass fucking corporation. I'm sorry, I swear too much. I'm going to target that corporation, and it didn't stop them that they didn't have a group of people with them. They knew what they were doing was right. They thought about their goal. They thought about the most effective target. They did not wait for a truckload of people. They went out and did what had to be done, and they did the research they had to do, and the rest followed. And this is just, this is a humongous victory. You can't force bad people to be moral or ethical, but you can convince greedy people that you're costing them money and make them change their behavior. And this happened because a few people did not care that the most effective target seemed big, but they were not scared, and they just persevered.
And also to tie back into that, we were talking about the 3 folks that we're focused on right now at UCLA. There were more than 3, and Dario Ringach, not that long ago, some years back, after 2000, he left his job as a vivisector at UCLA because he was tired of home demos. Like, he was tired of being agitated against for maybe like 30 minutes at a time. For however many times it happened, I'm sure it was under 10 times. That was enough for him to feel so uncomfortable that he wanted to leave murdering animals. Like, that's absurd. According to a study that we found, about under 900 documented animals are killed every single year at UCLA. But for those not counted for, that's well over, what did we say, like under 10,000 maybe well over 10,000? That's amazing, that's crazy. So if one person leaves that industry at UCLA, that's a substantially lower number of animals who are being murdered, like literally murdered. So it's really important that we stand up against that. So yeah, choosing your tactics. Find what's comfortable for you. If you're someone who's really good at outreaching and coming and connecting with people, and you can get postcards signed like that, like we definitely need you. If you're someone who's an awesome agitator, we definitely need you at these home demos, because we had 30 at the last one, and that's pretty incredible, right? Like, we started with about 20-something, went down to 5, went back up to 30. So we can double that. If everybody just brought one person, we have 60 people in this neighborhood or in the sector who's, who doesn't need to be there. Like, he needs to stop what he's doing in Newtown, right? Like, that's something very, very powerful. So choosing tactics, yeah, do what works for you, what's most comfortable, but at the same time, don't be afraid to do what feels a little bit scary. You know, like if you're not good at public speaking, don't let that stop you, because the only way you're gonna learn how to do it is to do it. You're gonna sometimes look clumsy and say stupid things on camera that can never be erased, and it's fine, because you can allow yourself to learn from that. To like be like, wow, what about nervousness, or what about a camera? Like, why do these illusions of fear manifest inside me so powerfully to where I misinform the public and myself? Like, these are really important things, right? Not as an organizer or as an activist, but as people. So, yeah, so choose your effective tactics. If you don't think that a certain campaign or organization is doing it right or whatever, and you want to be involved still, come bring it to the table. You know, like, let's all talk about it. Email or in person, come to the meetings, and let's just build together and make this movement as big as we can possibly make it. Because the LA animal rights movement can be so much more than what it is, and there are a lot of compassionate people out there. We want to tap into all of that. So, and yeah, again, like, you know, like Carol mentioned before, feel free to shout out things at any time. You don't even need to raise your hand. Just, you know, speak your mind freely and comfortably.
So are there tactics, there's some tactics that I'm unwilling to utilize or support, right? Are there any tactics like that for any of you?
I read something before where it's like you were saying, finding compassionate people. It's just kind of like making that connection and bringing those types of groups. There's plenty of people that, you know, come from a place where they can relate to whatever the cause is. But it's just kind of like bringing those people together and then creating something bigger than that, like the community. You know?
Right.
So Dia's pointing out that bridge building and community building is very important too. Is there anything that you guys wouldn't do? Can you think of a tactic used in a movement that you've seen that you won't do, and why won't you do it? Or that you won't support, maybe not won't do, but won't support? Ali?
Well, it comes down to personal preference in terms of what people want to do. For example, well, I have nothing against people breaking the law to do stuff. I work with the James at home. And also when it comes to funerals, I just stick to the educational part because I guess I don't think we should allow, as a society, we shouldn't allow euthanasia. But I completely understand that for someone who's getting something so bad, if someone wanted to harass them, even a friend of them, they'll go and visit them at home. So if someone wanted to make a call and threaten them, I completely understand it as a tactic. It might work. But it's not something that I personally want to engage in because I want to change people's minds as a society. So depending on what your objective is, your tactics will work. Since my objective is really to change people's minds, I guess I'm hesitant to do tactics because it doesn't work.
I think that's interesting.
This was actually a really good way to wrap up everything we just said. He has pointed out that he has certain goals and that he's going to choose tactics that fit those goals, and that he has personal boundaries for himself, but then he's going to go ahead and let other activists do what they want to do, right? Did I summarize that incorrectly? So that's the distinction between a boundary, a personal boundary, and then a movement boundary, or what you're not willing to accept in your movement versus what you're not willing to do.
Yeah. I think it's really good that, you know, you don't, I don't know, but I'm assuming that you don't go out publicly saying, you know, home demos are wrong, don't do them, they're harassment, stuff like that, right? Yeah, I don't. So also on a deeper level, like on a more personal level, I'd be interested to explore, you know, just for yourself maybe to resonate on, you want to reach the people, right? You want to reach the people because you believe that we have a direct effect at furthering exploitation, liberation at a faster rate, right? So we can go straight to the source of oppression and make that happen sooner. Even though you may not feel comfortable doing it yourself, why would you not want to be a part of something like that if you know that it's working, despite comfort or despite what feels right?
Because I think the issue is not so much that one person is doing something that's oppressive.
Yeah.
I think it's that we as a society allow our knowledge to
Absolutely.
it's
Yeah.
not just as it's
Yeah.
allowed to happen
Yeah.
in society.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that part. And also, like, to expand on that, like, I think it's really important to go at all angles and do those demos and also do the outreach and do it all because it's all really, really important, right? So, yeah, is anybody else uncomfortable with certain tactics at all? No?
What about,
I just wanted to talk on the home demo just as an experience, like how because when I first started, I was the same way. Because I kind of bought into, I thought, oh, you're giving out the addresses and you're like going to the house saying die, you know, not you guys, but you know what I mean? You hear on the news like that's what they do, and I was like, I'm not bombing, you know, I'm not like blowing someone up or burning them, you know. And so when I first heard about them, you know, I remember I told you, I was like, I don't know about that. But instead of just believing that, I went to check it out myself. And if I didn't like it, I'd just get in my car and leave. But when I went, there was no, you're, you know, we're going to kill you. It wasn't. We were really far away. I mean, I doubt that, you know, they might be in the back room not even hearing us. You know what I mean? I'm just saying, you know, we have a distance. And it's just talking to them. But the thing is that that's not the only thing that they do. That's just one aspect. Then there's memorial. So there's all these different things. So it rounds out. And when you're standing there doing the chanting, it actually is, it's more emotional than it is aggressive. Like it's more, you know, like it's more just trying to like get to them. And, you know, the words that are being said aren't like, you know, I don't know how to explain it, but it's just, you know what I mean? It's not, if you just go, and if you don't like it, cool, leave. But it's just the stuff that's being done is at a distance, and I could understand if the person was standing there, and we were like right in their face. That's different. We're yelling at a house.
If I was that close to him.
Huh?
I would yell at him.
Well, you would, right. And see, I might not. but it's a house. And that's all. I'm just, so I go now, and I'm good with
It's
that.
not only like doing that, but when you're out there, you're actually outreaching to the neighborhood. You're
Yeah.
letting the neighborhood know. You're educating the neighborhood. You're letting them know exactly what they're doing, because most of the stuff goes unknown. So what those words that are being said are not only for them, it's also to educate the neighborhood, so it's outreach.
And it's kind of to shame more than to harass.
And I like what was pointed out, that there was a willingness to try. So as we said, you need to be open to everything in the toolbox. So it's worth it. It's worth it to try and to find out how you feel about it. Are there any other tactics? I'm thinking of one just because it's International Women's Day. Like, what do you guys think about using women's sexuality to gain movement gains? So
I don't like it.
Posing topless.
Like sex strikes?
Like with the
Sex
fur.
right?
Yeah.
Like people that have sex.
Oh, I've enacted those in my home before, actually. Yeah, okay. Those are effective. I'm thinking more like maybe it's only prevalent in the animal rights movement, though I doubt it. I've seen it in other movements.
I've seen in the fur with like calling women like, oh, you're frigid, making them be naked. There's a lot of
Right, so
attacks
like
on
calling
women.
people names, but I'm thinking about like using your sex appeal. So you know, like naked women promoting, like I'm gonna like PETA demos. I think are an exemplar, right? Like showing up to a demo naked to get people to look at you. This does not happen in other movements. Are we unique in that way?
Draws the wrong crowd.
What?
It draws the wrong crowd. People
think
who
it
might
draws
not
the
be
wrong
interested in the ideas, but it's like, oh, hey, there's babes in this movement.
If it draws the right crowd, is it the right tactic?
Is it the right tactic?
It's the fact
I
that,
don't know.
you know, like, women's sex appeal does sell. It sells a lot.
And so we should use it because it does?
No,
That becomes the question, right? So if we know that it's an effective tactic to meet our goal, does that make it okay?
does it make it okay? It depends on who's promoting it and how comfortable are they doing? How comfortable are they to do it? You know what I mean? Like, how comfortable are you gonna be to do it? You know what I mean?
Well,
Are you gonna
so
is it
you-
gonna
so it's
affect
an
you in a negative
an
way, or is it
individual-
gonna affect you in a good way?
So you're saying it's a question of individuality. So as long as the individual has personal agency, you're comfortable with it.
Well, then let's say there's plenty of girls that are willing to do it,
Right.
and they're willing to do it for money. They're willing to do it for popularity. You know, it's just a fact that you know. Women, you know,
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think that it's okay as long as it's like an individual decision and there's like a component of non-coercion, because if there's like any like group coercion to say, okay, we're all gonna do this, you have to do this. That won't work. Like it has to be individual, and there can't be any coercion. But that's my thought about it.
So I want to say this about that. Do you all believe that freedom is possible if those others of us, be it women, men, other species, people who identify with different labels, because there are plenty of them, if others are oppressed, can we as a people be free?
It was a tactic that was very effectively used by the gay pride movement in the 80s when it started. The idea was to go out there and use their libido and their attractiveness and what made them gay out in the street and make it open, right? It did two things. One, it did attract the wrong crowd to begin with, but that caused the movement to solidify and to gain an identity. This is not something that we have yet achieved now.
Is that a realistic identity, do you think, or do you think it's more of a collective identity of what mainstream media would consider to be attractive or gay?
No, I think that the ideal of freedom and to own your own body, it's an ideal that we have not achieved as a society. To be able to come together in a way that says, I am myself, and I have the right to do as I will. It's something that's worthwhile, and we have not formed a collective sense of identity that backs that up. We are too afraid of what the mainstream says, too afraid of what the perceived enemy says, and too afraid of myself. So if I'm able to do something like that, it is not about what sells, it is not about what result we'll have, it's about now I am free and comfortable with myself.
So one of the things, I wasn't, just as a response, sorry, it feels really unfair that we can have a conversation and I get a microphone. But just as a response, I only know about this movement through intellectual pursuits, not through any experience or watching it, so I could be wrong. But I understood this tactic as a way to make the public uncomfortable. So it wasn't about drawing in people through politics of sex. It was about saying, you are not okay with my body. You don't respect my body. My body and my sexual decisions disgust you, and I am going to make you face it. I am going to make you uncomfortable. I'm going to make you deal with it. And I feel like women have used that tactic effectively. PETA's favorite example of why they use this tactic is they like to talk about Lady Godiva riding through the streets naked on a horse. But in Lady Godiva's time, the idea of a naked woman was very different. Like now women are being paid for it. So I'll give you guys sort of the progress line on this. Progress for Science, our group, is we're vehemently opposed to it. And the reason we're opposed to it is because we don't think it is anymore a politics of making people uncomfortable and making people look. It's a politics of sensationalization. And even though I believe that the women, particularly because the animal rights movement is such a privileged group of people, it tends to be middle to upper class people that are white, that are well educated. So it's a very privileged group of people that are choosing to shed their clothes to gain attention for animals. And I believe that every individual person who does it, I think that they're very well intentioned, that they've thought about it, that they believe it's helping. But I believe that it misappropriates something, and it scoops up what our society devalues about women. So as you were saying, our society is not yet to a place where we can accept our bodies. So women's bodies are still commodified, and as long as women's bodies are commodified, using them in order to stop the commodification of another oppressed group makes no sense, because we feel that what it does is it bolsters a sense that certain bodies can be devalued, certain bodies can be commodified, certain bodies can be used to achieve an end. And in our movement, we want people to stop using non-human animal bodies to achieve an end, and part of that is being unwilling to do the same thing in any of the tactics that we use. So while we encourage a full toolbox, we also encourage people to really think about tools that are not actually for dismantling oppression, because some tools need to be thrown out because they actually bolster oppression. So we want a hammer to smash stuff down, but we don't want a hammer to help build stuff up, right?
their males in the skimpy outfit saying, I'm not wearing fur.
I'm sure there's
So they don't.
I guess that's what we're arguing against.
This tactic is bad because it has enough bad things associated with it. And for someone who doesn't care about that, it's just that tactic.
So I think that that's what we're arguing against, and we were trying to be clear because we said keep every tool in the toolbox, but we're trying to be clear that we don't consider some things tools, and that is because as we keep every tool that we're willing to use on the table, we keep every cause for justice on the table. We are against all oppressions. So if you're going to be against all oppressions, you can't compartmentalize. You can't say, I care about non-human animals right now, so I'm not going to care about the oppression of women. I mean, there's a reason that an animal rights group is here on International Women's Day, because these struggles are intimately tied. Oppression is oppression is oppression. Our histories of oppression look so different, and the way that oppression is played out in societies looks so different. So we begin to believe that our causes are disparate, and we end up vying for resources and vying for attention and fighting amongst ourselves rather than building bridges. If you could imagine that every single person involved in every single movement imagine themselves as tied to other movements against oppression, we would have one really, really big fucking movement against the oppressors, because the oppressors are so few. So if we start remembering that when we attack any system of domination, we're attacking every system of domination, then I think that we can get further.
Something to keep in mind is that this luxury of people don't separate. And for some people, we don't have the luxury to care about people that are misusing some tool. For some people, they do see it as an immediate threat. For example, I was being taught that one little thing. I do not mind if you have to kill someone. I didn't know when you want to die. If you have to kill some people to free people, even if the person is just working over there because they need a job, they could find a job. If that's what it takes, it's okay. But if it involves exploitation, if that's what it takes to free me from the really horrible torture and how we do it, other people keep with it. And for some people, what they see happening to animals is so bad that they allow it some things. If they make mind, they think that's right. So just keep that in mind. Things are it's okay to allow some bad things to happen.
I think that you can, I understand the motivations of people that choose these tactics, but we have to remember we are privileged. We are in a privileged room. We're in a privileged room right now where people can take their Sunday off to sit around and talk about tactics. We're in a room right now with people who have the luxury of time to step away from their identity politics to talk about, well, identity politics is the wrong thing, but, you know, like, people in this room, we all have time to sit around and think about things. We all have the luxury of being, maybe not all of us, but probably a lot of us are literate. So I'm guessing most of us are literate. We have the luxury to be able to read things, to be able to think about things, to be able to build community and tackle things. So I understand, and this is why we're here, I understand the impulse to look and say, like, if you just think about non-human animals killed for food, 9 billion in one country, in 1 year alone, of just animals that walk on the land for one industry alone, they're murdered and slaughtered, and like you want to do immediately what you can to save them. I totally understand that. So you want to make vegans as fast as possible, but you forget to do research to find out if increases in the number of vegans actually changes the rate of slaughter of animals. In fact, we doubled the number of vegans in 6 years and it doesn't. We get so hasty that we don't, I'm not saying don't be vegan, you should all be vegan, it's not sufficient, definitely necessary. We can get so hasty, so we're like, okay, if this gets the person to eat the soy wiener, like, I'm gonna get naked so that they eat the soy wiener and maybe someone will take a picture of me. But you forget that when you support oppression, you cannot dismantle oppression. So we do have the privilege not to embrace these things, and especially when we're thinking of people, like thinking of myself, I'm exceptionally privileged. So it is my duty and my responsibility to be as little of a harm as I can to others, because my very existence on this planet, my life, the things that I'm afforded come at the expense of so many people and so many non-human animals being oppressed. That is why I'm comfortable in my life. So it's, you know, I have my iPhone and I have a lot of education and I have my nice clothes that I'm sure someone made somewhere in a bad way. So I feel like it's my obligation to sit down and think. And so I'm not running around every time I see a girl in a woman in a lettuce bikini and saying like, what you're doing is wrong, stop doing it. No, I let them go do it, but I'm encouraging people in this room as we workshop things like tactics to realize that there are a lot of tactics. We need to be open to all of them, but we also need to make really sure that the tools that we use aren't tools that simultaneously oppress someone else while we try to liberate someone. You can't open one page and build another. It's not going to get us anywhere.
And remember that everything has a rippling effect, right? So like I think nudity is really beautiful personally. I think it's wonderful, like the concept of it, right? Like the idea of making your own decisions. And if you want to wear something or not wear something, like who gives a crap, you know, what society thinks about it. Like if you're happy in your skin, you should be happy in your skin as a woman or as a man of color or someone who doesn't identify with either one. That's really beautiful. But being in a position of privilege, you have to understand that by posing in these certain kinds of ways and being active in these certain types of ways for the animals or for any other kind of group that you're fighting for, like what you're doing is it's not about the oppressed women who are posing for these pictures, but it's the women you are representing as a collective whole, right? So like when you see these photos of Corona bottles shaped like women's bodies, and you see these American Apparel billboards with like girls with their legs open, like all the way, right, to like sport a headband. Like it makes absolutely no sense, but it's so heavily normalized. Words like bitch, hoe, fur, hag, things like that are so normalized, but why is it directed towards women? Think about that. So again, I don't know if you all heard the comments I made earlier when Miriam was speaking, but I was talking about how I interned at a company that said, why do women work hard for what they have in the entertainment industry? They have ATMs between their legs. And that is that same ideology that we're working with when we say, if that's what it takes to get them to eat a vegan wiener, who cares? Just do it. There are so many other tools that we have in the box and so many tools that have not been created yet. So get together and brainstorm. Like one really effective one that we monkeyed around 3rd Street Promenade. We had monkey masks. We've never done this before. None of us are actors. We're not good at it. But the fact is, once you put the mask on, like it transforms. So we have maybe 40 folks. And we had postcards, which we actually brought today, and we would love for you to sign, which at the very end will distribute if you're interested in that. Hopefully all of you are. Then what we did was we put on our masks and we had a dialogue between vivisector and primate. And Carol was the vivisector and I was the primate. We had the animal liberator and we had the activists surrounding us. And what we did was we hopped around and we monkey noise all down the promenade, and we peeked in while other people were performing in their circle groups. And everyone was looking at us like, what are they? Are they like a street stunt? Like, are they like a traveling acting group, or are they animal rights activists? We don't know, but we want to know. And we stopped about 7 times down and out the promenade, just doing this dialogue where we stopped and people fell to the floor with like flameless candles in their hands, and this dialogue would go on that was actually educating them. Instead of saying, hi everybody, we're Progress for Science and we're here because we want to stop animal exploitation and primate vivisection at UCLA, we let them know that in an artful way. And we found out that night that art really hits people. One, because art moves people, and art is a really powerful medium that I think we should all use. 2, because they weren't sure what we were and what they were listening to, but because they're in LA and some of them are probably tourists, it was something that was sensational to them, and so they watched. And we got 400 postcards signed again in about an hour and a half. Like, that's awesome, right? Another thing that we tried, like for those who are uncomfortable with the more like agitated, loud, raucous demos that we have in the neighborhoods, they said, what about a silent demo? We'll do a visual, we'll do an evening demo. We did that, 5 people showed up, 2 of those people were organizers. So that we found did not work, right? But it's okay because it's trial and error. We listen and then we try it, and sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. So now we're focused on like what actually is working and developing new tactics that are also, a creative edge at agitating or educating, and just furthering the movement faster so we can end tactic liberation as fast as we possibly can in UCLA. Any questions, any thoughts? And honesty is awesome. If you disagree, like please say it. That's totally welcome and encouraged.
That's on violent tactics and how to be specific, how do you define violent tactics? Because there's like a lot of people that are saying that property destruction is violent, but personally I don't think that it's violent. I might disagree with you. What's your position on that?
First, can I say thank you so much for pointing out that people use the word violence without defining it. Thank you so much, because a lot of times people argue like crazy about tactics and they are not defining the tactics in the same way. So, violence, Vida, go.
And actually, see, it's kind of nervous because we don't really sit and talk as a group about every single thing. So I'm afraid that I may answer in a way that's more so like personal to myself and for the group. So forgive me if that is the case, and please correct me if that is the case. And that actually might be changing right now because my views change. You know, like as I talk to different people and you know stuff like that. I want to stay open. But I think that violence is unfortunately necessary in a lot of movements because there is so much violence being thrown on so many victims, right? And so I'm not concerned with it though. So I don't think too much about, you know, whether violence is acceptable or not. I think it happens and it's kind of necessary. Would I actually define it as violence, or am I, you know, putting my foot in my mouth right now? I'm not quite sure. But when you're talking about like violent oppression, slaughter, torture, mutilating these animals, injecting them with methamphetamine, like Edith London, David Yance, Stephanie Groman now does. She's a grad student at UCLA that we'll be focusing on more in the near future. That is violence. Now, when you go to a home demo and you yell out and stuff like that, and you say trans, that's not at all violent. Like, not by any means necessary. Is destructing home property and doing stuff like that violent? Maybe, but who cares? I mean, I'm not saying that we do this because we don't. But I'm saying we're supportive of tactics that are actually furthering the movement because that's what needs to happen, right? So, did I answer that or did I not answer that? Really? Okay. Do you want to say anything about it? I feel like I answered that.
I don't have much to say about it. I mean, I'll give the Progress for Science disclaimer because we, you know, have to do this, but we only utilize legal above ground activist tactics, but we do not denigrate or refuse to support any tactic that furthers animal liberation in any way, as long as no animal, human or non-human, is hurt. To me, to call, unless you agree with our government that corporations are persons, is absolutely bullshit. To consider property damage violent, you might be able to argue that someone who owns property or is somehow associated with the property might feel fear because you've chosen that tactic, and perhaps that's violent. But even, I don't think how you define it matters. I think if you talk about each tactic and when it's used, that's what matters more. So I believe that generally people who disagree with a tactic that's questionable will call it violent, and people who support it will choose not to call it violent. I think that it is, I don't think there's ever, I know of one revolution that did not agitate in a way that was socially looked down upon and involved some sort of illegal action, and that was like the singing revolution in Estonia in the, I think it was the late 80s, and they wanted to get, you know, the Russians have basically taken over Estonia, and they wanted to get rid of them. And you know what it took for them not to agitate and to only be completely what we would call peaceful in the way that we think of, like, in the way that we like to colloquially think of, like, Gandhi's movement. It took almost every single person in the capital city to leave their house, sing a band song, and surround the Capitol building. Like, it took almost every single citizen. And because movements don't have every single citizen, I say agitate. I personally, you know, it feels hypocritical because I personally only do things that are legal. I have a lot of animals that depend on me. I have a job that probably, like a lot of people, I don't know how much everyone in this room values paid labor, but I have a job that I feel changes a lot of people, and so it's really important to me that I get to go to my job on a regular basis. So I choose not to engage in these tactics. And I'm not that brave. I don't want to risk being in jail. I'm really afraid. I'm really afraid of being caged, which is why I fight so hard for non-human animals not to be caged, because I empathize with that fear and that feeling. So I don't engage in those things, but I think that, you know, a lot of things are necessary, and I'll say that they're effective. So Edith London is one of our targets, and people talk about how these tactics aren't effective. Well, a lot of people, another problem with social movements is people don't do their research a lot of times. They act on impulse and emotion, which is great because it's inspiring, but you need to follow it up with really good research. So a lot of people that as a single bit of violence at all. And then people said, well, that was just harassment, it scared her, blah, blah, blah. It didn't scare her at all. When we have demo at her house, she comes out, she waves, she's had parties before. It didn't scare her at all. She publishes publicly in support of animal testing. Or maybe it was effective. I don't care if it scared her or not, if it was effective. I tracked her research up to that point, and the amount of studies in which she used non-human animals were cut in half. So something happened, something changed, shifting her research. So I think that the degree that it's effective is great. I think it's, it's not always effective. It's not always effective for everyone to show up in black bloc at a protest. Like, if you're doing something totally illegal and above ground, do we need anonymity? I don't know. Is anonymity scaring people for no cause? I don't know. So I think it really depends on the activist, the action, the goals, and what you're trying to achieve. And you won't always get it right.
And I think the violence that, we should, or I don't really like saying should, but the violence that I focus on is the fact that we live in a hostile, violent society, where something like $30,000, which is not even a small fraction of what she makes in a year, was so publicized, and so, the public empathized with her, saying that these were terrorist attacks and things like that because she lost money, and she was a little bit uncomfortable because her house was wet. When she murders people, like, these are individual people, animals, non-human animals, whatever, you know what I mean? Like, the fact that we live in a society that focuses on stuff like that reminds you that we live in that type of environment. So call it violent, call it not, I really don't think it matters. At least right now I don't, maybe that will change, but I don't think that matters all that much. You do what needs to be done. How much time do we have left? Are we over time already? Yeah, 5 minutes, okay.
What about like farm animals?
Say again?
Farm animals. What do you do with farm animals? Like, we have history of like eating animals in the farm,
But you have the privilege not to eat them. You have the privilege, and our history is not actually domesticating animals. That's something that's happened. That's something that humans have done, and as we domesticated animals, we increased the rate at which we ate them. I'm going to say, if you want to eat someone else, I want you to go chase them down in a field and tear them apart with your hands and eat them like that. And do it once a year, Like, what? Like, you are extremely privileged. You live in a world, you live in a community, you live in a culture where you do not need to eat others, and where the rate at which people eat others is directly tied to diseases that happen to human health, that the others that you're eating are produced in an industry that is degrading, destroying, ruining our environment. It's causing environmental discrimination in such a way that poor populations, non-white populations in this country, immigrant populations in this country have really high risks of diseases, have really tough time getting access to healthy food because we create wastelands. The shit from these animals creates toxic waste that gets dumped into the water and into the ground of people who aren't as privileged as us to live far away from that. And add to that the misery and the pain that's being caused. Human workers are being hurt. The individual animals are being hurt. Babies are being ripped from their mothers. These animals would rather not be born than be born into a life that's as violent and oppressive. And then when we consume from these animals, we get cancer, we get heart disease, we get diabetes. The leading causes of death in this country can all be corrected by not eating non-human animals. Further, I believe that it also perpetuates sexism in our society. This is not usually where I bring this conversation to a general audience, but it's International Women's Day, so I'm going to bring it there. Our agricultural industry is based on the degradation and the commodification of female bodies. I mean, male bodies are hurt too. If you think of egg-laying hens, for every egg-laying hen, a baby boy hen was thrown into a plastic bag and suffocated because he was useless. But when we think of the dairy industry, these are all women. Did you know that these women are raped? They don't want to be impregnated. There's actually something called a rape graft, which they are put on to impregnate them. That only happens because we live in a rape culture, and that also reifies a rape culture. The idea that you can sexually assault a female-bodied individual, the idea that you can use female-bodied individuals to produce eggs and milk for you to consume, and you don't even have to pay her. I mean, that is just, or ask for consent. I think all of these issues tie together, and I think it's a really, really easy choice And it's super, super easy in Los Angeles too, because there's like a burrito cart in the evening on every other corner where you can get a really inexpensive, really healthy burrito that has no animal products in it. So like in this community, you only have to walk a block to get a really healthy, really cheap vegan meal that also supports a local business rather than a corporation. So I say with our privilege, there's absolutely no excuse not to embrace this.
And also remember that when you tap into like thoughts of tradition, when we say things like, well, we've done it for centuries, since the beginning of time this has happened, traditions, following traditions without critically thinking about them is very detrimental and very dangerous. And that's how certain institutions really flourish, because we feel like we need to do things as a society because we're told to, and because our mothers and fathers did it, and because our grandparents did it, and our further back ancestors did it. That's not reason enough at all. We need to continuously think about why we are contributing and acting and not acting and thinking the way that we do, and seeing if it actually makes sense to us. And it'll trip you out, you know what I mean? One of my friends says, one of his pieces, he says, living in a cold world, and he says, being sane in a crazy world hurts. And I'll never forget that, because it's so true. You tap into that, it's like you can't look back anymore. So remember that it's not about tradition or what's happened for years and years. It's of no value. We create tradition.
I believe that humans, like, we're natural omnivores,
Do you really? Well, we can go into that too. That's a different conversation. But also the way our teeth are structured, the fact that our intestines, don't process animal bodies as fast as vegetables, the fact that our teeth are this way, the fact that our jaws. You can watch the Gary Yourofsky video. It's really good. It covers it all.
Listen, and let's give you the premise that you're arguing. Fine, we're natural omnivores. I'm a natural baby-making machine, and I'm 31, and I haven't dropped one out yet because I recognize that I have the privilege to adopt someone. I like spay and neuter, don't breed, whatever species it is. So, and if any of you have kids, that's fine, that's your choice. I'm not denigrating you. But I'm just saying, like, you are not, if you believe that you're tied to your biology, then why are you wearing clothes? Why are you engaging in this thing we call culture? It is not okay to appropriate a biological argument when it's useful for you, and then to throw it away when it's not useful for you. There's a lot of things that we are made to do. Women historically have been oppressed.